Welcome back to Henry Felix Discourses. We'll be talking about history today from Winsor. It's our fifth one on Winsor, and it's called The Belly of the Beast because this is the part of the curriculum you would most likely think of when you think of CRT and DEI, and it really had its start in studying history. That goes all the way back to Marx, who has this idea of a flow of history that's pretty much inevitable, and it's grounded in history for the most part. That's not to say that they don't want it to be part of every subject in school. There's somebody named Lawrence Alexander who goes around to many schools, and he's a consultant for DEI. And he has worked with Carney Sando. I'm not sure if he's still working with them now, but he used to be one of the bigwigs over there. And what he talks about is when he comes into a school, he gets the lay of the land and then sets out most of what is going to be going on with DEI. And then the next year they start making changes to the curriculum. Now he puts it in terms of just adding things to the curriculum, and it's very non-threatening, and we're not touching anything. We just want to add things and complete the story. Anybody who knows anything about teaching knows that if you add something to the curriculum, it's already full, and there's no squeezing something in and just talk about this for 10 minutes, 15 minutes without taking something else away somewhere. Teachers are not they don't have a slow day, and there's already plenty for students to learn, and you can't just keep piling in more things without taking away something else. And also with history, you can't just say, well, we just want to tell the full story. That's impossible. You are making choices no matter what about what story you want to tell. Anyway, he at one point in one of his lectures was saying, it's not about history. He's pointing at the camera. He's got the fire in his eye, and he's right about that in terms of the fact that he doesn't want it to be just about history. He wants it to be about everything, including math, including athletics, including science. DEI should be everywhere. Now, before we get started on that, I'd just like to remind you of how to get to this PDF. It may be helpful to you. It could be hard to read on the screen. And if you want to, I'll be reading it aloud, but if you want to read it, then here's how you do it. You go to Winsor School, click on that. That'll take you to the home page. Go up here where it says menu, click that. You get about, go over and down to equity and inclusion. That will bring you to this page. You scroll down until you get to DEI report. Click on that. It takes you to this page. You get lift every voice, and you click read the report. Okay, that's the page it brings you to, lift every voice. Click read the report, and it will download a PDF. So let's see what the PDF says. We did English last time. The next one on their list, it's alphabetical, is global studies and then history. And we're skipping global studies for now. I haven't been doing them in order anyway, but global studies is supposed to be the summation of English and history. So we'll see if 1 + 1 is 2 for global studies on another discourse. For now, we'll talk about history. And it starts out like this. As we enter a new decade, some old and some new challenges will shape how the history department reforms its curriculum and pedagogical practices. Now, this is where you need to get ready because this is a long sentence. I'm going to take a deep breath. In response to the events of 2020, including COVID-19, the death of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement and social justice protests, the national election, and Windsor's own reckoning with regard to race, equity, justice, and inclusion, the history department is redoubling its efforts to ensure that its curriculum not only gives Windsor students the relevant historical background for understanding and assessing the current political and cultural environment, but also ensures the development of those social and critical thinking skills required to navigate a world of political discord, of increasing economic inequality, and of media and social media bias. So that's a long sentence, and it's laying out a social agenda for the history department. It's an activist agenda. We've talked about that in other discourses. I don't necessarily want to rehash everything, but this isn't history the way we would think of history, because history could also be about why America is the way it is, why our government is the way it is, how it was really the first democracy / republic in the world and really stood alone at that time and was assumed to be destined to failure. And they'd already been through Napoleon, and they saw that when people take over and get rid of the aristocracy, then chaos breaks loose, and you need the aristocracy, and the individual's bad, and if you have democracy, you'll have mob rule, and so forth. That could be about that, but it's going to be about this, and this is a very current event-oriented social agenda history curriculum based on DEI. Okay, so that's there. But what I'd really like to draw your attention to is the style of writing. It's a long sentence. It has a lot of lists within the lists, or within the sentence. So you've got three things when they might be able to say it with one word. So, for example, instead of saying implement, you might say introduce, develop, and practice. And I don't think they've wasted too many words here, but the little lists of things and the length of this sentence and the verbiage is something that I want to compare to one of these people who brought critical theory to America, which is Herbert Marcuse. He was associated with the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. Okay, and these people came to America and wanted to spread Marxism, really, and they settled down as professors, mostly at Columbia University. And their thought was that if they could transform the universities, that you would be able to transform the culture, break down its confidence, and eventually destroy capitalism. Now, one of his essays is called Repressive Tolerance, and this is a paragraph from that essay. I didn't work too hard to decide which paragraph to take. It's one of the shorter ones. You can see a lot of long stuff here. This essay is long, but this is a good one because it also says something about one of his main points. I'm just going to read it and just listen to the way it sounds. Try to understand it, though. I suggested that the distinction between true and false tolerance, between progress and regression, can be made rationally on empirical grounds. The real possibilities of human freedom are relative to the attained stage of civilization. They depend on the material and intellectual resources available at the respective stage, and they are quantifiable and calculable to a high degree. So are, at the stage of advanced industrial society, the most rational ways of using these resources and distributing the social product with priority on the satisfaction of vital needs and with a minimum of toil and injustice. In other words, it is possible to define the direction in which prevailing institutions, policies, opinions would have to be changed in order to improve the chance of a peace which is not identical with Cold War and a little hot war, and a satisfaction of needs which does not feed on poverty, oppression, and exploitation. Consequently, it is also possible to identify policies, opinions, movements which would promote this chance, and those which would do the opposite. Suppression of the regressive ones is a prerequisite for the strengthening of the progressive ones. So, I know I read that fast, but I think you can see how that's relatively hard to understand, and that there's a stylistic similarity between this and what's in the Winsor document. I point that out because I think whoever wrote that document has read some Herbert Marcuse and was influenced by it. That's a guess. I'm basing it on this. The writing style. It's a pretty well-established writing style and concept in Western culture right now, that the real intellectual is someone who speaks with a lot of big words, a lot of long sentences, has a lot of highfalutin language. And this really runs through everything, and it even goes down to things like Monty Python, where in Life of Brian, I believe, they're going past the peasants in the field, and they start talking, and they're talking about social theory, and they've got all the words and all the interpretations, and they're talking about the proletariat and everything like that. And that's the joke, because here we have the peasants talking about that, and they would be the proletariat as opposed, although the proletariat really is more of an industrial concept. But the thought that people who talk like this are the intellectuals is a little bit of a trope, almost a cliche. They're not always the intellectuals. I think we all know that. You don't have a monopoly on being an intellectual because you talk like this. But it's there. Anyway, I think if you are imitating that style and you've read a lot in that style and you're influenced it, then you would produce something like what is coming out of Winsor in the history part of that. Part of writing in that style is not just to convey thoughts, but also to tax your working memory. So if you've forgotten what the working memory is, you have long-term memory, you have short-term memory, and you have working memory. And working memory is the shortest of short-term. It's the things you need to remember for right now. So if you're in a meeting, you need to know where your papers are, what you did with your briefcase. You need to know where your keys are. You need to remember where you parked the car, who the names of the people in the meeting are, where the meeting is, how to get to it, which elevator you take. It's all those things like that, things that will not be remembered the next day. That's working memory. And working memory as you're reading is remembering all the vocabulary that's being used, working through the grammar and syntax of what's being presented, and being able to make sense of it. And it's a big tax to read something like that. And it's a big tax in your working memory. You probably have to read it 2 or 3 times. And part of it is to intimidate, to say, I'm so smart, if you can pass this test, you can be one of the smart ones too. And you do feel a little bit proud having understood an essay like this, because it takes work. I mean, it's not light reading at all. And it's not bad to read something that's difficult, but there's also a gatekeep. There's a barrier there. So it's like once you've understood that, it's almost like you've understood the language of the priests. There isn't an effect of that. So I'd also like to just point out that while we're on Marcuse, we might as well talk a little bit about how he has the idea that when you're in a revolutionary movement, you want to suppress the free speech and freedoms of the other side. So he's talking about, as the left is rising up, they should repress the right. And that means that their freedom of speech, freedom of expression, movement, whatever, anything, really needs to be taken away or severely restricted, preferably taken away. And also that you accuse them of everything. You say that even if they're not being violent, or they're being the slightest bit violent, pushing somebody in the street, that you say that they're violent, that you say that they're racist and anti-Semitic, and nowadays, more than his day, homophobic, Islamophobic. You put all those on and you keep saying them again and again and accuse them of everything. Whereas if people on the left, on your side, are being violent, then you don't mention it. You forgive all of that. If they're being racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, Islamophobic, then you ignore that. So there's a very specific and definite double standard that he's specifically talking about. So it's right here in the last sentence in this one. Suppression of the regressive ones is a prerequisite for the strengthening of the progressive ones. Okay, and here's another quote that's very similar. Right here, liberating tolerance then would mean intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left. Okay, regardless of what their actual behavior is. Now, some people point to that and say, that's not what he really meant. That's not what he really meant. That he's not saying that government should do that. And he's not really. He's talking about a revolutionary movement should do that. And then he has the same utopian idea as Marx, which is that once they win, then all that stuff will just go away and we'll have the perfect society and all the bad feeling will just evaporate and everybody will live in peace and harmony forever after that. It's hard to describe how that happens. But so he's not specifically really saying that, sure, that the government needs to do that all the time, because this is the process of winning. Once you've won, by definition, you don't need to do that anymore because you've already completely crushed the enemy and they're gone. And getting them gone can mean anything with these people. And I would argue also with Marcuse specifically. But back to the Winsor document. So here we are. I think that's similar, and I think that's where we can see that the people, whoever wrote this, whether it's one person or a group or whatever, is heavily influenced by the Frankfurt School. It sounds like it, and it would fit because CRT is directly from the Frankfurt School, and DEI is the practice of CRT. So just to continue on, Ultimately, we hope that our curriculum fosters the dispositions required to act responsibly on behalf of justice and equality in the world. So again, it's the activist agenda, justice and equality, wherever they want it to mean, I guess. But also dispositions is a word that stands out to me. When they say the dispositions required, they're not really talking about the reasons or the theories required, but the disposition. It's just a way of behaving. How are you behaving? Are you the kind of person that we want? I think that's a little different from somebody who's been educated and has been taught to critically think, which is, of course, a great time to just mention that critical thinking is often confused with critical theory. So we hear critical race theory and critical theory, and we think that that's kind of critical thinking, I guess, because we haven't heard that before. And it's not at all. It is not, there is not a thought of teaching people to think critically, but to learn what you are supposed to learn. So there's a little bit of a difference between indoctrination and education, which we may get to in a moment. In history, topics such as slavery, the parentheses, mistreatment of indigenous groups and other minorities, pluralism, democracy, and human rights are addressed in major required courses at the most developmentally appropriate class level. So just starting at the end here, developmentally appropriate, this does get a little bit toward the concept of either educating or indoctrinating, because when they say developmentally appropriate, every school should be introducing things at the developmentally appropriate stage. That's just basic. But on the other hand, there is a little bit of nudging involved in the idea of forming people the way you want them to be formed. I'll do something more on social and emotional learning at some point, but when computer companies like Google are coming in and giving out Google Books, just be careful about that, because they're not just being nice. They're also gathering a lot of information about these students, and they will have an identity. And just like your Google identity, and they'll be able to track them through the school. They're not going to be able to change that identity and say, now that I'm in the 6th grade, I just want to have a completely different identity and have a clean slate. They're not going to want you to do that. Basically, that's not going to be allowed. And they're going to know so much about all of the students that they'll be able to start nudging them and forming them any way they want, the same way Facebook is done, and the same way YouTube does, and the same way that a lot of these companies do. They have so much information on you that they can give you some of the exact right things to just push you a little bit in a certain direction that they want. And I think that should be scary to parents. I think that's a very scary thing, that they would have that much influence, because they have them for most of the day, and they're very good at what they do as far as that sort of persuasion. And you have to start wondering whether you're really the parent after a while. I think there's just a danger of way too much influence from big tech companies that don't care about you at all and just have their own agenda and will use children wholesale to further that agenda. Anyway, we have... all right, so, the major required courses, okay? The most important ones, I guess. Anyway, lower school history courses emphasize the roles that cultural encounters and cultural conflict play in shaping identities and nations. Okay, so that's a pretty general concept. What I find interesting here, it's in a later one of these discourses, I'll talk more about their actual curriculum. That doesn't really fit with their actual curriculum as they have it put out. The curriculum is predating DEI, and I don't think it's changed as much as DEI wants them to have changed. I don't know what the state of that really is. But just like Lawrence Alexander was saying, you start out with DEI by laying out your main goals, and then you work from the top down, and you start making your changes to the curriculum later. So this is a document that is pushing down from above. And when we get to that, when you read the lower school history curriculum, I don't think it quite fits that. But on the other hand, if this is the rule of the day, your curriculum can say whatever it wants. And that can be what you send home to people, and they'll say, hooray, this looks great. But that may not be what really goes on in the classroom. But I think it's interesting because this stuff is actually a little old. This document here is, 2 or 3 years old at this point, 2 years old. So in terms of making that big change, it takes more than 1 year. You can't just print this document and then have everything change. So they're working on that, and they will get down to the nitty gritty of everything. But I find it interesting that I don't think it's quite the same. But shaping identities and nations. Cultural encounters and cultural conflict play in shaping identities and nations. Identities and nations. Why is identity so important here? Why is identity so important to the history curriculum? And it's because it's part of DEI, and that's important to them. Moving on. In the upper school, the department's year-long required history courses use primary sources and ask students to make real-world connections. Okay, so again, current events, and looking over their curriculum, it is much more in line with this. The one that they have now may be a little more updated than the lower school one. The lower school one is still a PDF. This one is something that is on an online website. They've embraced it fully. Let's just say that, put it that way. The primary sources are important in history, and it's perfectly appropriate to be using them in a high school. Primary sources, however, could be anything. They could be the newspaper. They could be a TV news report. They really could be. And you can do whatever you want with that. So we have to take it with a grain of salt, I think. The Class 6 American History course has, as one of its goals, quote, to use our knowledge and empathy. There's that word empathy again. I want to get a bell and ring the bell every time we hear empathy. To understand the experiences of a wide variety of social and identity groups in American history. So identity groups, the most important thing to them. There it is. Moving on. The history department believes in the value of exploring historical moments, I guess like George Floyd, COVID-19, death, Black Lives Matter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as they stated before. Historical moments and reading texts, including primary sources. Second time they've said it. I don't know why, except that they probably will be reading the newspaper a lot. That reveal a broad range of human individuals, ideas, values, and forms of social and political organization. Okay. So why do I keep harping on the newspaper? It's because I'm just pointing out that it's really it's a current events social agenda type of history. It's not what history normally is. The department also accepts its responsibility to explore people, ideas, values, and historical moments, again moments, that stand in great contrast to our own contemporary notions of what is virtuous and that may make us uncomfortable. Okay, so making us uncomfortable, this is a little bit of that word is almost, I don't know if it rises to the level of being a shibboleth or not, but making people uncomfortable is a word that just comes up over and over again with CRT and certainly with DEI, where we need to have uncomfortable conversations and uncomfortable questions. And the discomfort generally goes in one direction. So this is where we talk about whiteness, and the questions, I think you know what I'm getting at. The questions are going in one direction, not both ways. And it's supposed to make the dominant people feel uncomfortable. And while there's value in that, it's like I can't fully get on board with the concept of bringing people to school to make them feel uncomfortable. Everybody has to be challenged on things, but there's a little bit of a chip on their shoulder when it comes to showing, especially with a school like this, where the rich kids need to see how they're privileged and so forth. And there's just a little too much of an edge to that. And I think you can do this in ways that are not this aggressive concept of making people uncomfortable, because they also have a very specific endpoint in mind. And it's not really to open up a discussion that people are going to talk about and come to any variety of conclusions. They know what the conclusions are. They know what they're driving at. And students pick up on this very fast. They're not stupid. And they know what they're getting into when you have a teacher who's talking like this. Moving on, challenging topics, of course, provide difficult conversations. There they are. And thus we are committed to creating a classroom environment that fosters intellectual and discursive risk-taking. Now, you're supposed to, but after all that, I wonder if risk-taking is going to be your number one priority as a student. I think a lot of students may choose to think, I will not raise my hand, actually. I like the idea of risk-taking, but on the other hand, in a way, I think they're talking about some prescribed risks. So many students, and I would include myself in this, and I don't want to sound like I'm projecting my experience onto everything, but I would fall into this category, I think, where, and I think a lot of other people have had a similar experience. Once again, anecdotes don't equal data, and I don't know everything, and there are 132,000 K through 12 schools in that age range anyway. Doesn't mean I know everything about everything, but I think it's valid to raise this idea. I think it's common enough that it's valid to raise this idea that when a school like this is telling you that you can say whatever you want and you have your freedom of opinion and everything like that, they're really talking about a menu of opinions that they already have in mind, and you can't really stray from that menu of opinions. And if you do, you're getting into very hot water. As far as I know, and this is definitely true, we all know this, that has gotten a lot more restrictive over the years. So that menu's gotten a lot shorter. And there's less and less ability to think for yourself in these schools. So when they say risk-taking, the risk is, there's also a risk of getting in trouble, frankly. Moving on, at the same time, we are aware that such an environment might produce discomfort and that individuals might make mistakes. Now, I'm not sure if they're repeating themselves or if they're changing what they mean by discomfort. Because those who feel discomfort, if they're making people uncomfortable, it's a one-way street, more or less. And this discomfort, I think what they're saying is that you have an environment which might produce discomfort, meaning that some people might be offended and that individuals might make mistakes. Okay, and this is the menu of options I'm talking about. Mistakes are, your opinion now can be a mistake. Now, obviously, there are certain opinions that you can't bring up in any school. You can't try to justify murder, for example. That would be something you need to talk about, I guess. But when with this is, you're on very dangerous ground here. You may say something that will be seen as a mistake, and then let's see what happens. We will attempt to ensure that everyone's voice is respected. We will attempt to ensure that everyone's voice is respected. Okay, I read it two different ways on purpose. Diverse ideas are explored, and that mistakes by both teachers and students are seen as a learning opportunity. So diverse ideas, the word diverse with them, it really means, when in the context of DEI, it really means ethnically diverse. So they're saying diverse ideas. They've got it in black and white. They said it. I, again, cannot read someone's mind, but I feel like that's there because the person writing this knows someone like me is going to come along and say, well, you don't have any diverse ideas. You really just have ethnically diverse people. And so you put that in there to kind of head me off at the pass. And okay, at least there's a little bit of a discussion involved there, because at least there's an acknowledgement that criticism might be out there. And that the only way to address it is to say, no, actually, we do have diverse ideas. That to me is progress. That to me is a good sign. But I think it's also the reason it's there. But anyway, everyone's voice we'll attempt to ensure that everyone's voice is respected, diverse ideas are explored, and that mistakes, again, your diverse idea might be a mistake. And we know what the mistakes are, because they already have them in their mind. By both teachers and students, this is part of the leveling process. Lawrence Alexander would talk about that a lot too. You're the guide on the side. The teachers and students are on the same level. Okay, and maybe we'll talk about that another time. But this is all part of this whole concept. It's all part of this smorgasbord of ideas. Anyway, are seen as learning opportunities. Now, I don't know about you, but when a teacher comes up to you and says, this is a learning opportunity, it means you're in trouble. This is a learning opportunity. I didn't really have that experience myself, but I know what it looks like. This is a learning opportunity. Well, sure, when you kick someone in the ankle, I guess we have a learning opportunity that's not the right way to respond. Maybe, okay, that's pretty clear cut. But if you're expressing an opinion that doesn't comport, or that someone claims to be offended by, and that's causing discomfort, and let's say it's causing discomfort based on lived experience. Let's say it's causing discomfort in a way that you had no idea. Will that be categorized as a mistake? Will that be categorized as a learning opportunity, which can not just, it's not always so respectful what that learning opportunity is, and how that's implemented as something that they use as a learning opportunity. I could talk about one example of someone that I talked to whose son was talking about transgender, used that word, and the teacher got mad at him for using that word. And he was saying, why was she mad? She said I was going to get a 0. It was the wrong word. I was, what is the right word? And that got straightened out. He was fine in the end. But it just shows the kind of minefield you're walking on, because he was using the right word. That was the word they were supposed to be using in that context. But for some reason, that person took offense to that word, and then suddenly the bricks came down out of the ceiling. And that's a very uncomfortable situation to be in as a student. Ultimately, we will hold those in our classroom accountable. Well, accountable to what? And by accountable, do we mean punishing? We'll hold them accountable. That's a very vague term, and I think there's a little bit of a threat involved there. Ultimately, we will hold those in our classrooms accountable, assume the good intentions of everyone, and approach our work with humility and generosity. Okay, so they end on a nice note. You've got to get that in there, and remember that this document is supposed to be the nicest way of putting it in the best possible light, and I think they're very sensitive to that. I can actually give them a lot of praise. I haven't found a grammatical or punctuation error in this entire thing. I think they worked hard on it. This is not something that they haven't thought about. Sometimes things are repeated, I think, in a strange way where you're thinking, well, why didn't they notice that? Why is that kind of redundant like that? Why didn't they straighten that out? But as far as the mechanics of it, it's perfect. But it seems to be put in there maybe just to show that, yeah, we're still going to be nice about this. And I wonder, again, if that's that dagger. You're twisting the dagger and you're smiling at the same time. Now, I'm going to read the last part of this again, and just put yourself in the position of someone like me and like many people I know who have been through a school like this. And they already know the score because they've already been through classes where these things have happened. They've seen it. They've already seen it, and this is going to be what you hear. Just imagine what it sounds like to hear this. We will attempt to ensure that everyone's voice is respected. First of all, you say, sure, Jan, I've heard that before. That doesn't really happen. Diverse ideas are explored, and you think, no, they're not. And that mistakes by both teachers and students are seen as learning opportunities. Okay, so this is the message where it's like, well, all right, I won't say anything. I'm not going to raise my hand. I'm not going to say anything. And I'm just going to write whatever they want me to write for my tests and papers and just get through the class. This may be what they want, because if you can just beat people down and get them to comply, that's one thing. And it's certainly not progress from the biggest complaint we have about schools, which is that we create little soldiers who just conform and do whatever they're told. There's a strong strain of this here. There really is. You hear that, this sort of non-committed, what you don't really believe that everybody's going to be listened to and everything, and that there are mistakes and there'll be learning opportunities. It means watch out. It means watch your step. Ultimately, we will hold those in the classrooms accountable. And as we hear that, it's like, well, accountable, what is the first thing a student think when accountable? They're thinking about detention. They're thinking about things on your record. They're thinking about having that on your something that who knows, that a college might see. And when they're trying to decide, when these girls are going to be trying to get into Harvard, Yale, Stanford, MIT, whatever, when they're trying to decide amongst a lot of strong candidates and they see one little thing on that record, well, maybe that's how we make our decision, and we just sort of push that one to the side because we've already got plenty of great applicants already. This is something that people are very nervous about, and don't underestimate that. That word has a lot of power behind it. And I mean power not just as in it's an influential word, but there's the feeling of power from the administration that they will exercise that power and that they can kind of do what they want. So ultimately, we will hold those in our classrooms accountable. So you better watch what you say. You don't want anything on your transcript. You don't want anything there. So just go with the flow. Tell them what they want to hear. Try to get the grade. Just don't worry about it. Okay, and assume the good intentions of everyone in the prayer. That's where you're saying, all right, yeah, whatever. I mean, everybody says that. So I think that's just something to think about. That, food for thought. That does exist. That is a fear. And especially in private schools where people are dying to get into those top schools. They want to get into that school where they'll make those connections. That's where they're here. That's why they're willing to spend $56,000 a year on this education. They don't want anything messing it up. So when you've got people who are coming in with DEI and we've got all these great ideas and we're going to be talking about things that are going to make you uncomfortable, and this is the thing, and we're very zealous about it, and blah blah blah, all that, then people tend to just curl up and just try to survive that. And that's why this is a detriment to education. That is why this degrades education. It's why it's a step back in education. It's taking them away from what you should be learning as a student, which is to critically think, which is to have opinions that can be talked about, opinions that can be anything. We'd probably do a lot better to go back to the ancient Greek style of saying, let's just give two people, let's just back up whatever argument we make and just say, okay, one side's going to argue this, one side's going to argue that. It doesn't have to be debate class, but you could do that. I know there are countries that do this a lot more than we do. Romania, I think, being one of them, where you write an essay arguing one point of view, and then you write another essay arguing the other point of view. And that's how you really learn about argumentation. This isn't about that. This is about learning what their point of view is. And this is where we get into that difference between education and indoctrination. Some of it is right here. Okay, this is Etymology Online. It's a great website. It's called Online Etymology Dictionary, but if you put in Etym Online, you'll get it. Educate, bring out, lead forth, from ex out, and ducere. Okay, ducere is Latin for lead. You lead someone out. And it came to mean to provide schooling for, and here there's the claim that there's no authority to say that it means is to draw out or unfold the powers of the mind. They don't have anything specific to go back to on that, but I think that is commonly, they do say it's the common statement. And I think it's commonly understood that way. You draw out their abilities with what you're teaching them. And you teach them to be independent thinkers, people who can solve problems on their own. Indoctrinate, here we've got, because not everything's completely just ruled by the etymology, but it informs us, because they're saying education, well, there's no real proof that it means that, but that is how people use it. Here we've got to imbue with an idea or opinion. Okay. Now, if you're a doctor, you have learned how to be a doctor. You've learned the state of the art on being a doctor. That stuff is as set in stone as it can be for that particular time that you're learning to be a doctor. It's not a bunch of opinions. You're not talking about things. It's not discussion, that kind of thing. You're learning the trade. And that is indoctrination. And so in that sense, it's a great word. You have to indoctrinate people with the right ideas, because then they will know what to do. You need that for any practical application of your knowledge. opinion there, I think is informative, that it's also to imbue with an opinion. So is this history curriculum, is this teaching kids really to think for themselves and have opinions and discuss them on a level playing field with everyone else? Or is it really about bringing in the CRT agenda and letting people know that if they don't toe the line, there's going to be trouble? Because that would be indoctrination. That would be saying, you're going to learn this. And they were talking about the major courses that they're going to be taking, and the required year-long courses. Okay, you're going to have to live through that, and they're going to be imbuing an idea or opinion in you. That's my reading of it, and I think that's pretty justified. I think I've seen it. I think I've experienced it myself. I think lots of people talk about it, and what I don't see in something like even this document is something about how, as I was saying, what are we learning about the United States as a special nation? Because I know that the idea that it's an exceptional nation that is sometimes laughed at, but it was exceptional. It was really the only republic at the time, and this was a brand new idea, and nothing like it had ever been seen, really. And that does make it special. Or are we going to be talking about a worldwide agenda where we have to be uncomfortable about our history and how we fit in? So it's a very different attitude. And if we, well, I'll leave that for another thing, because this is already long enough. We'll get to it eventually. Like I said before, it's like eating an elephant. You do it one bite at a time. We don't have to talk about everything. So I hope that was interesting. I hope you liked the thumbnail too. I learned how to cut out those pictures so that you can put them in a thumbnail without the background, and I was having fun with that. And for this, I thought, for a couple of them I've had, they say, well, have a face on there. Make sure you've got a face, and if it's got an expression, that's even better. People will click on it more. So for this, I was trying to find something fun, and you've got devils and you've got dragons and stuff, and I finally came across that one. And I said, okay, well, let's just keep it light, Let's not get too negative here. So I hope I will see you next time, and I would like to leave you with a little joke about flying under the radar, because let's try to not be too negative here. But there's a good joke about a student, okay, and you may have heard this before. But the student is sitting in class, and he runs out of time on his paper and on his exam, and the professor's made it blindingly clear that if you're even a second late, your paper will not be accepted. Okay, just no exceptions to that rule whatsoever. So he is late. He was trying to finish, and he ran up and he dropped the paper and he picked it up, and he's 1 second late. And the person said, "Nope, you can go away. You're not. You're getting a 0 on this. You're too late." And the kid says, "Do you know who I am?" And the teacher says, "I have absolutely no idea who you are, and I don't care." So the student just picks up the big stack of exams and shoves his in the middle and dumps it down and walks out. So that's great. And you know what? I'm even going to put in a link to an advertisement that had the same thing, and it does it better than I just told it to you. It's funny. It's a funny ad for something just like that. So I'll put that in the comments. I thank you for listening, and I hope you'll be back. Please give a thumbs up, make a comment. You can be nice, or you can be mean. Either way, I can take it.